were doing a little bit of hearing from God, like what one word do you hear from him? And the word that God gave me was righteousness. And I'm not like a King James version kind of gal. I don't do like righteousness. I do other like modern words. Like righteousness is an old word for me. But I was like, okay, I'll take that. So we put it on the board, and then throughout the year, God has just been showing me, and this is what righteousness looks like, and this is what righteousness looks like, and it keeps popping up. And when I was out running a few weeks ago, a month or so ago now, God gave me the phrase second nature. And I'll talk to you about how that links in with the words he gave me at the start of the year. But when you hear the word second nature, what kind of comes to mind? This is going to be an interactive one, just to let you know. It's not a rhetorical question.
Stuff you do automatically.
Stuff you do automatically.
Yeah, like breathing, you just do it without thinking about it.
Which is great.
Driving a car.
Driving a car, second nature. Yes, okay. So you all kind of get that understanding. So I thought, I'm going to just do a quick Google search and see what comes up with the word second nature. And there's all sorts out there on the word second nature. So it's an online jewellery site, second nature. There was a film that was recorded or filmed in 2003, which was a romantic comedy, second nature. I don't know who these people are. Ben Bolt, Louise Lombard, Curtis O'Brien. I don't think it's an A-list kind of film. Lee Zimmerman. It's also a weight loss program. So that's actually one of the first things that comes up. Second nature, you can lose weight with all sorts of weird, combinations of milkshakes and all sorts through second nature. And there's a theme tune on Netflix, Don't Look Up, that uses a song, Second Nature. Everyday People brought out a song. Does anyone know Everyday People? That was in the 90s. Yeah. One of my faves that's come up was a song by Dan Hartman in 1984. Does anyone know who Dan Hartman is? No? Right, we're going to have a quick clip. Okay, those of you who like the 80s, this is going to float your boat, okay? We'll just have a quick clip. Yeah. We all need to be in our fluorescent socks for this. Yeah. Do you remember this now?
Well, I like it. I remember it now. Oh, nice. Very funny. Big hair.
Yeah, big hair.
One thing about that was he didn't have all the batteries in the stereo because they were much heavier.
It would have been really heavy.
When he had all the batteries.
Yeah, so there we go. It was very classic 80s though, wasn't it? Yeah, everything about it. So yeah, second nature, like you said, was, what did you say, Paul?
It's second nature, isn't it? Really?
So in the dictionary version is a tendency or habit that has become characteristic or instinctive. So maybe the word autopilot comes to mind as well. Can you think of some common examples, maybe of yourself, that you kind of do, like it comes second nature to you? I'm just going to quickly put a couple out there. The other day we dropped Ethan off and Clonus was on the roof at Dad's house, as you do. And he was strolling around on Dad's roof like nothing was a problem. And I was like, if Lee had been up there, it'd be like... it came a second nature. You didn't even think about it, that you were on a roof. Yeah. But for Lee, that would have been... Yeah, and then the other week, obviously, we used this place to do the hospitality for Gardner Douglas and their open day. And I came at the end, and it was just like the team was working so well. And Susan, you said, oh, it just comes as second nature to us to work as a hospitality team. So there's amazing. The other thing is Lee will often drive in a different direction to where we need to go. I don't help though, because I'm like, where are we going? Just at a really crucial part of the turning. And usually you get it right, but sometimes you go into autopilot. And then I just freak him out because I'm like, where are we going? Just as we need to turn.
And now we're in Asda.
We miss the Ollerton turning all the time at the river.
Oh yeah, Ollerton. I can't lie. I miss that all the time. Yeah.
So anything that comes second nature to you, just shout it out.
Brushing your teeth.
Brushing your teeth.
Yeah.
Cooking, ironing.
Having a wash, yes.
Working with certain children, I just do it without sort of thinking about it.
Yeah. Anything else?
Checking the doors are locked at least 4 times before I go upstairs.
Checking the doors locked. I think we have to work on that
Go
one.
through the back door four times before I go upstairs, just to make sure.
I was watching a programme the other day, The Making of a King, which was on BBC iPlayer, and it was about Prince Charles becoming King Charles. And he was talking about how it had become second nature to him to be a king before he was even a king. So slipping into that role wasn't a big thing to him because he'd been trained, yeah, and it then became instinctive to him. So let's have a look at some examples that have become second nature to some people. I'm working towards them, all of them, but they're not quite there yet. But here are some examples of people that have slipped into that second nature mode.
Well, a sleeping bag.
A gym bag.
It's a gym bag, yeah.
Well, maybe you could go to sleep on his back, couldn't you? Or he's lying there.
Yeah. It's just that bit I couldn't do. I wouldn't do that because that just looks like you'd end up in problems.
That's great, isn't it?
These are all me filmed earlier.
That's Josh.
Yeah, that looks like
That looks like Josh.
sure Lydia does that all the time.
Whoa,
Whoa, look at that!
I'm practicing this.
Oh, we do that at school sometimes.
Okay, hands up. Who can do any of those things? In your dreams.
I just drink out of the cup.
Okay. So, it's amazing, isn't it, that some people can do things like that, and that's second nature to them. And it may not have been something that they woke up one morning and went, right, I'm going to do this. It's a process, and I think we all see that when something becomes second nature to you, it tends to be a process. But you're using, so these guys didn't go to the shop one day and say, I just need some extra muscles, I'll just slot them on, bolt them on so that I can do what I want to do. It was already in them. The muscles, the brain power, the skill was already in them. And that helps us to realise that sometimes we might find it difficult to get to a certain point, but eventually we can, because we've got those abilities in us. And back to the explanation, a tendency or habit that has become characteristic or instinctive. So when you create a habit, it doesn't come automatically. So I don't know if you've heard of Caroline Leaf. She's a neurologist or something. Neuroscientist. And she says, and a lot of others say, that it takes 21 days to form a habit. So sometimes we kind of, an example, losing weight. Some of us have been there where, you're trying to lose weight, and within a week you're like, I thought I'd lose at least 2 stone by now. After 7 days. Oh, I'm really disappointed with myself. But it takes 21 days to even start the process of losing weight, because our mind needs to think in a different way, maybe with our eating. Same with anything that you want to change, if it's a negative thing, like giving up smoking or drinking or whatever. It takes a while for those things to happen to it then become a habit. But then something happens, there's a shift, isn't there? Have you ever been in that situation when you've been practicing and practicing, like learning to drive? Like when I was learning to drive, I was actually quite useless at it, really. Lee punched me once because I was so useless at it. And I ended up leaving him in the car in a junction, like, well, you drive home. I used to drive like this when I wanted to turn the corner. So rather than actually turning the wheel, I would turn myself, which doesn't help. And then trying to, I'd always look down on the gears, like, what gear am I in? Oh no, the drive, oh no. And it would be a nightmare. But then I got to the place where it shifted, and I could, actually, you can trust me now, I can drive without running into anything either. So there is a process, and then there's a shift where you kind of get into second nature, into that habit or instinct of being able to do something. So there are things that we do now that we've trained ourselves to do, and they've become second nature to us. And normally this is using the skills and abilities that are already in us. We just sometimes don't know it. Okay. So if I was to play in a football match, my skills and ability are, I would say, minus 15. So I won't join your club or your group because you'd be embarrassed. But if possible, if I put that effort in, I could potentially kick with my right foot and aim in the right direction with it. So that you can. Same with running a marathon. The thought of 26.52 miles is like, is that even possible? But people have trained, and they can do it. It's using the skills and abilities that's already in them. So I was thinking about this, that we understand that from a natural point of view, don't we? So let's look at the spiritual side of things, okay? If we can apply that in the natural, then how do we do the same approach in the spiritual realm? So what we need to talk about then is our heart. So I'm just going to give an explanation that Kenneth Hagin talks about when it comes to our heart, because it's not our physical pump that's pumping blood through our body. It's a spiritual thing. So Kenneth Hagin says, when we talk about the heart of a tree, we mean the centre, the very core. When we talk about the heart of a subject, we mean the most important part of that subject. the very centre of it, the main part around which the rest revolves. And when God speaks of man's heart, he is speaking about the main part of a man, the very centre of his being, which is the spirit. Okay, so a central truth, which is something I didn't know about for years, was that we are a spirit, we have a soul, and we live in a body. So we are spirit beings because we were created in the image of God, who is spirit. We have a soul, and we are living in a body. Okay. So when we're talking about the heart and it being the most important, the central thing, what's God most interested in? Our hearts. Yeah, so the core of who we are, the very being of us. So if I chopped your nose off, I'm not going to, but if I did chop your nose off, would you still be you?
Yeah.
Just noseless. But you'd still be you, wouldn't you? Because the very core of who you are isn't your nose. I do like my nose. I just want to. I used to spend most of my life going, I do like my nose and my feet. But the real me is the inner me, the heart of me. Okay. So when Jesus came to earth, he offered an invitation. And it was to our heart level. It was a heart level invitation. Okay, we were born with one nature, a sinful nature, and we were invited to join or become a second nature. So when we were born into this world, we had a first nature in our hearts, and then when we encountered Jesus and he gave us an invitation, it was to join a second nature, to become a second nature. And that's why I think God wants us to focus on the heart level of something, because we can do things in the natural that are of second nature to us. The invitation then is our heart level. What's his invitation to us on our heart level in relation to a second nature? And this is where that word righteous comes in. So Jesus said, God said to me at the beginning of the year, righteous. And I was like, oh, I don't know about that. I don't understand that. But he then has brought it down into righteous in my heart, righteous as a second nature to me. And we're going to talk about that. So first of all, Jesus told a parable that explains the heart nature of somebody, okay, and we're going to just watch that. It's in Luke 15, 11 to 32.
And he said, there was a man who had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of property that is coming to me. And he divided his property between them. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had and took a journey into a far country, and there he squandered his property in reckless living. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. So he went out and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into his fields to feed pigs. And he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread, but I perish here with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants. And he arose and came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion, and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, Bring quickly the best robe, and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand, and shoes on his feet. And bring the fattened calf, and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this my son was dead, and is alive again. He was lost, and is found. And they began to celebrate. Now his older son was in the field, and as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf, because he has received him back safe and sound. But he was angry and refused to go in. His father came out and entreated him. But he answered his father, Look, these many years I have served you, and I never disobeyed your command. Yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him. And he said to him, Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad, for this your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found.
So we've seen that before, read that before, haven't we? The story of the parable of the prodigal son. So how many people are in that story? 3. Yeah, so there's father and 2 sons in that story. But really there are only 2 types of heart in that story, 2 conditions of the heart. And the first nature and the second nature are represented in that story. And those 2 conditions of the heart, the first nature and the second nature, we can see in Galatians 5, 19 to 26. So it says, the acts of the flesh are obvious: sexual immorality, impurity and debauchery, idolatry and witchcraft, hatred, discord, jealousy, fits of rage, selfish ambition, dissensions, factions and envy, drunkenness, orgies and the like. I warn you, as I did before, that those who live like this will not inherit the kingdom of God. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness and self-control. Against such things there is no law. Those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. Since we live by the Spirit, let us keep in step with the Spirit. Let us not become conceited, provoking and envying each other. So those are the 2 lists, the first nature, the second nature. And I've got Abs to put that on a slide for us so that we can have a look. So the 2 sons are represented in the first nature. So the younger son did all the lusting and the sexual immorality and the drunkenness and the wild parties and all of that. But we don't realise sometimes that the older son is also in that list, because there's division, there's hostility, there's envy, there's selfish ambition. So, and quarrelling. So he is just as much in that first list, that first nature, as the younger one. But when we look at the story, sometimes we're like, oh, that prodigal son, he got that wrong, didn't he? But they were both in that first list, because it's a condition of the heart. Jesus also kind of explains that the older son can be like the Pharisees. So the religious people of that day, they were all very much, very judgmental, very critical, not relating to people like prostitutes and tax collectors because they were clearly sinners. But they're still in that first nature list. And I was thinking that sometimes when we don't see things as a heart condition, we can do all the right things, go to church, read our Bibles, say, peace be with you, and also with you, and all these confessions and declarations. But that doesn't make any difference if we're not in the heart, if it's not a heart condition. The Father, he's definitely in the second nature list, isn't he? So he's got all the love, the joy, and I like that clip because it shows how happy he was. He didn't care. He was just so overwhelmed with joy. He had patience, my goodness, to know that his son was somewhere else and probably doing the things knew he was doing, to have that patience to know, no, he's coming back. He's coming back. The goodness, the kindness, the faithfulness, the gentleness, the self-control. What if he'd have run off and tried to find his son? That wasn't what God wanted. That wasn't the will of the Father to do that, to go off and chase after his son. He was the one that was to be in the second nature list, in the heart, where he can pray and he can love and he can still connect with his son, even though he's not with him at the time. So, the younger son can definitely be seen in the first nature list, but something changed. So we know that it didn't change for the older brother. He stayed as he was, but something changed. And when we were talking earlier about when you form a habit, when you start to shift into second nature, there is a change, isn't there? It's like, what I couldn't do before, I can do now. And that's what happened with the son. So in the verse, in one of the, which one is it? I can't remember where it says, he came to himself, or he changed his mind. I'd like to think that he changed his heart. Like, he had a heart change at that point and made his way towards the Father again. And what he did was that he came to his Father, who represented the second list, the second nature, and he became like his Father. Now, the older brother, if you remember the story, the father said to the older brother, all I have is yours. You've been with me all this time. You haven't gone anywhere. I haven't gone anywhere. He's basically saying, my heart can be your heart, but you haven't made that decision to connect with me. You've been near me, you've been around me, but you haven't made that heart change to be like me. And again, that when God was talking to me about this, we can be around church, we can be around the Bible, we can be around people of faith, but if we haven't made that decision to be like God, to be like Jesus and receive the second nature, then we're like the older brother. It's like we're there, but we're not there internally. And that's a challenge for us. Am I shifting gear to be in the second nature? And the other thing is, like I said earlier, it's in us. We have this ability. When we make Jesus the Lord of our lives, we are given the second nature. We are given everything that we need to form that habit of being like Jesus. The other thing with this story is that sometimes we identify as the prodigal son who's already still in his sin. Like, I'm judged, I'm criticised, I'm not good enough, I've just had 10 beers, I don't like beer. I've had 10 ciders. I've just shouted at my husband. We're all sitting in this second list of old nature, first nature. And we don't sometimes identify ourselves with the Father. There was a shift. He knew that it was in him to be a son like his Father. And a representation of that was the 3 things that the Father gave him. Can you remember what those 3 things were? Shoes. That's it. Well done. You can all go home now. So the robe represented God's righteousness. Okay, so back to the word righteousness. The robe represented God's righteousness. Now, sometimes the religious way of thinking of that is that God covers us with his righteousness, but we're still filthy inside. That's not what it's about. When that robe went around the Son, he was seen as the Son of the Father. Okay, you don't see the inside. You saw him as a representation of the Father. And that's what the Father does to us. He gives us himself. He gives us his identity. He gives us himself. That was him saying, this is me, I'm giving it to you. Okay? It doesn't matter what's happened, I'm giving that to you. The ring was a symbol of identity. So when he gave him that ring, he's saying, you are my child. You are me. Okay? When I put on this ring, well, it wasn't that ring, but it's a long story. When I put on this wedding ring, my identity was in Lee. We became one. Okay. When I look at that, it automatically makes me go Lee, because I'm in a covenant relationship with him. My identity is in him, with him. So when he goes to things like Power Up, or when he goes to conferences and I can't go, I'm not like, oh, I'm really missing out here, because he's me, I'm him. So what he receives in the spirit realm, I receive in the spirit realm, because there's no separation between us. And the same goes with this. When God gives us his ring, his symbol of identity, we are children of God. And Lee's been talking about, and others, Mark and Anthony, about who do you identify with? And here it's clear that when we receive Jesus, we identify as children of God. That's who we are. That's our identity. And then the sandals are a symbol of freedom. So back in those days, when you became a slave, so remember he had all that money, he went and partied, lost all of his money, and then he said he joined himself to somebody to become a slave to that person. He submitted himself to that person. And in those days, they would remove their sandals, because if they didn't have anything on their feet, they couldn't run away. So they were locked and imprisoned, effectively, enslaved with that person. So when he came to his father put sandals on his feet as a symbol to say, you're free. You're free now. You're free from that list. So he came probably burdened with a lot of that, hasn't he? Would you think? Well, I've sinned. He worked out his little script, didn't he? Father, I've sinned. Let me be your servant. All of these things. And the Father's I'm not listening. I'm not seeing those things. I'm not seeing that list. I'm seeing who I am. And this is who you are as well, because you're my son. You're my family. And that's where we need to focus. We don't need to focus on, woe is me, I've sinned, I've made an absolute balls up of this. Did I say that? I've made an absolute mess of this. I could have said something else. And we come to God like this. Oh, this is it now. I've made the worst mistake in the world. He's not seeing any of that, because we're his children. That's all he's seeing. That's all he's ever seen. And that's what we need to be thinking about. That's what we need to be focusing on. And to the point of, when we think about ourselves being children of God, we are love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control. that's who we are. So at the moment, I'm saying to Ethan, you've got patience. I can't patience.
Yeah.
He says to me, I can't
Patience.
patience. Yeah. And I'm like, no, you've got it in you. You've got patience in you. I can't patience. And sometimes we do that with God, don't we? Like, I can't love that person, you know? And God's like, no, you're like me. You've got that in you. But what we need to do is flip into second nature. So a tendency or habit that has become characteristic or instinctive. So if we know that we are children of God and we have those things in us, then it's our responsibility to form a habit. We can practice loving. I know Kenneth Copeland talks about find the person that you hate the most and start loving them, because you can practice forgiving. And one thing that I really like about Lee, just one thing.
There is only one thing.
Is that he practices saying sorry. So even if I'm the one that's mouthing off at him and saying this is all rubbish, he'll be the one to say, I'm sorry that you're... Okay, I'm going to give you an example. So, Lee walks faster than me, and I think he operates quicker than me as a pedestrian. I'm not a good pedestrian. So when we're crossing roads, I like to wait for the green man, and then, if there isn't a green man, I like to just take my time and then cross over. But because I'm holding Lee's hand, we're going across roads, and I'm like, I can't see, there's a car coming. And there was a time when we were crossing the road, and I just shoved my arm out like this and moved us forward because I couldn't see where the car was coming from. And he's like, he did this little newsreel of couple die in the middle of the road and their arms are stuck up like this. But I need time. I need to be able to see and process what's going on. So for him, second nature is to be able to walk quicker and straight out on the road. But for me, it's not. He's very good at saying apologising. So he's like, I apologise that you feel that way about how we walk together. And I'm going to adjust my way of doing things to make you feel more comfortable. Now, I should just trust him, you know, like if he says we're going, because he's not going to put me in the front of a car, is he? I hope not, I'm not sure, I don't think. But I should trust him. But he's been the first to apologise in our relationship, and I like that about him. But he's practiced that. And the things that we can just practice, like if you're finding it difficult but you know that's on the list, just practice it. Practice it. You know? We're not expected to ice skate, for example, from the years 6 months.
Oh, right.
We're expected to ice skate now, but there are things that we're going to have to develop. In the natural, we have to develop. Why can't we then take the pressure off ourselves and develop these things as well? And rather than beating ourselves over the head, being the older brother, well, you shouldn't have done that. You did it, okay? Practice not doing it next time. It's no big deal.
Practice makes perfect, don't it?
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Practice makes perfect.
We've started
Yes.
saying it at school, practice makes permanent.
Very good.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
Very good. One thing that Lee talks about is that spiritual truths are reflected in natural truths. Okay, so if we practice things in the natural, we can practice things in the supernatural and not beat our heads over about it. You know, it's there, it's in us. I was thinking about this the other day that when Dad's, what time is it? When Dad's got his Ukrainian family with him and they like chips. So he was getting fed up of just putting chips in the oven. So he's got the biggest, most almighty air fryer I have ever seen in my life. I mean, it's enormous. It's like UFO. It's just like massive. So he's like, come and see my air fryer. I was like, that's great. And then he gives me his piddly little one. Here, have that. But I'm really pleased for it. But I took it and like, I'm going to just put that away in the cupboard. Because I don't know, I don't need it. Do I need it? Don't need it? Don't know. But the other night we came home late and Ethan wanted chips. He likes chips. So I was like, okay. So I put the oven on, waited for it to heat up, put the chips in, waited 20 minutes to cook, got them out, waited 10 minutes for them to cool down, and then off they go. So about 40 minutes later, he gets his chips. I open the cupboard and there's the flipping air fryer. I'm like, 10 minutes! 10 minutes we could have been doing, have that done. But it was there, it was in there, but I just didn't like, oh yes, we've got an air fryer. And the same thing applies to us. It's in there, but sometimes we forget. Oh yeah, I'm supposed to be loving, aren't I? Whoops! Let's try that. Sorry, I swore. No, I don't tend to swear. Lee's the one that swears.
I'm the one that's married to Lydia.
Patience. I can't patience. Yeah, so it's about not kicking yourself in the head every time you get something wrong. It's about who you are, and we can practice who we are. Okay, and that's more important. I personally would rather see you at church because you want to be here, not because you feel you have to come. You know, or you're letting someone down. Or I personally would like you to read your Bible because you want to, not because you have to. And I've grown up in a denomination where the expectation was that you had to. And I don't think ultimately that's what they were trying to communicate with me, but that's what I received, that I had to do certain things to become a Christian. Do what you feel is right in the situations that you're in, and don't beat yourself up if there are times when you can't. We are all children of God at the end of the day, and we're not going to get to heaven and Jesus say to us, right, here's the register, and you came then, 76%. So at the moment I'm writing letters about attendance at school, and the expectation is 95%. Melanie will know this because she helped me while she was at school with me. And I'm having to write letters. This is a red letter. You are at 80% attendance. The expectation of the government is 95%. You could be penalised. You could have a penalty notice. All of these things. And as a parent, I'm like, that is tough. Because if I receive that, it's all about works, it's all about your failing as a parent. Yeah. And sometimes we get that. I don't want us to get that impression at church that if you don't turn up, you're failing. Like, you're a failure. No, you're a child of God. You're a child of God. Even if you ticked off everything on that list in the week, and you come to church, we're not going to go, right, was there any hostility in the week? Oh, out you go. Was there any wild partying? Why didn't you invite me? No. It's not like that.
We'd all be out there, wouldn't we?
We'd all be standing looking through the window. Please let me in. Please let me in. Yeah? So this is us. And I want to practice, I really do want to practice this whenever I see anybody. Yeah. Whether they've come to church 1,000,001 times or whether they haven't, whether they've been to church and they've gone and they're not coming back yet. I don't want to be Mr. Big Brother wagging my finger saying, what did you do with all the money we gave you as a church? You know, this is it. And the reason why God is really laying this on my heart is that we can practice now for when more people come. Okay, yeah. There are going to be more people coming with that list than that list, because they don't know that list. This week I had a conversation with a parent and a social worker, and the conversation was this: Please get up in the morning, get changed out of your pyjamas and feed your 5-year-old and put his uniform on and take him to school. Do we have to have those conversations now? We do, because that's what's happening now. So we want to be able to model and show the world this list, because they don't know it. They don't know this list. They don't know what unconditional love looks like because they've never experienced it before. They don't know what patience looks like because as soon as they've said something on Facebook, they're blocked or cancelled. You know, there's no loyalty, there's no connection. And we're not meant to carry around a critical, judgmental spirit like the brother did. We're meant to carry around the call card of our second nature, which is like the Father. So the Father was the only one in this story that had every right to condemn his son, wasn't he? He was the one that gave the money. He was the one that said you could go. I mean, it was an outright offence. Even in our society, if you said to your parents, "Can I have the inheritance now, please?" What? It's effectively saying, "I wish you were dead now. Can I have the money?"
Yeah.
You know, even in our society. But back then, that was like a death sentence on him. So he could, the father could have just gone, that is it. You know, we are cutting ties. We are not coming back from this. This is a deal breaker. But he didn't. One of the books that I'd really like you to also read, if you can, is Hosea. It's a pretty grim story. It's a grim story of a husband who pursues his wife even though she becomes a prostitute, has babies with other men, you know, leaves the home, comes back for a bit, leaves the home, comes back for a bit, leaves the home, comes back for a bit. It's like, how much more can a man take? You know, when I read it, I'm just like, I'm sorry for the women out there. You know, I apologise on behalf of all women because of this lady, what she's done. But that is God's heart towards us. Like, how many times are we going to allow this to happen and then, you know, not cut you off? But God doesn't cut us off. He doesn't cut us off. And I'm going to stop because I'm, you know, going to stop. But I just want to finish on Matthew 21, 28 to 32. So this is another parable of two sons, okay, that Jesus talked about. So he says, what do you think? There was a man, I've been singing too much. There was a man who had two sons. He went to the first and said, "Son, go and work today in the vineyard." "I will not," he answered. But later he changed his mind and went. Then the father went to the other son and said the same thing. He answered, "I will, sir," but he didn't go. Which of the two did what his father wanted? And we can all say, the first. Jesus said to them, "Truly I tell you, the tax collectors and the prostitutes are entering the kingdom of God ahead of you. For John came to you to show you the way of righteousness, and you did not believe him. But the tax collectors and the prostitutes did. And even after you saw this, you did not repent and believe." And I think this is again a condition of the heart, isn't it? So we've got one son who said, "No, I'm not doing that," and then does. And then we've got one son who says, "Yeah, I'll do that," but then doesn't. And it's a heart thing. So the working in the vineyard for us is relating to people out there, in here, the vineyard. This is us. And we can all go, well, it's too hard to love, it's too hard to forgive, it's too hard to not be critical, well, look what they did. But then something happens on the inside of us, there's a change, there's a shift, and we start forming a habit, like, it might be too hard, but actually no, because I'm a child of God, I'm a son of God, and I can do this. I can actually work in the vineyard. If you were reading the Rescue to Rescued this week, it was all about you can do this. It is possible to be a light in the darkness. It is possible to help one person and that make a difference. We can do this. But there are some people, the other son, who's like, yeah, I'll do it. Yeah, I'll do it. I've read my Bible 16 times today. I've been to church without, being absent the whole year. I'm up for this. I am in it. And then they come across people who are like, you wearing that? Or are you man, woman? Can't work you out. Oh, no, I'm not doing this. I don't want to get myself involved. And then they start being judgmental. But then we can have this shift. We can change this habit. I feel like anyone can walk through our door wearing whatever, and they will receive this: the love, joy, the peace, the patience. Yeah. Lee and I met up with somebody, a guy called Mark, a few weeks ago, and he was stinky, and he was wearing not great clothes, and just about wearing shoes on his feet. And I was like, we have invited him to church and life group, and I pray that he comes. But I also said to God, what do we do about that? And he's like, give him your robe, give him your ring, give him shoes on his feet. So we're representing God. We're saying, you're righteous. You're already in right standing with God. He's a believer. He believes in God. He loves God. We're saying to him, you can identify as a child of God now. We're saying you can be free from alcohol and addictions and things. We're not here to judge you. But God also said on a practical level we can do that. We can say, hey, do you want to come to Arish's barber shop and we'll get your hair sorted? Hey, shall we go and get some clothes? Let's give you a makeover. Get the ladies around and send him off to downtown and give him a makeover. We don't have to leave people in their drags and their rubbish, do we? We can actually practically help as well. And back to this rescue to rescue, if we do it for just one person, for Mark, that's a win, isn't it? It's a win for our society. If in the nursing home, Annette, you pray for one person and that person is saved or healed, it's a win. And that's where we can bring it down. We were talking about this personal, intimate relationship. The father had a personal, intimate relationship with his son. He offered that to both. He had it with his younger son. And that's what we can do. We can bring it all down, bring it all into what's my one-on-one, my personal relationship with you as a person in church and with people outside of church. So we can practice. That's what I want to say. Practice our second nature. And as our closing hymn, we will sing Dan Hartman's 1984 edition of Second Nature. But we do need to take the offering because I forgot, and Lee's going to do that.
Very, very good. So, now we're going to take up the offering. If you don't give, that's selfish ambition! As you can tell, I was listening. It is. But interestingly, in Matthew 6, it says, "For